thing that you would have spotted this weekend is that sci-fi has become a bit of a theme, hasn't it, in some of these talks? And there's one particularly famous sci-fi franchise that perhaps has a lot more to it than meets the eye. We're now going to be hearing a presentation about decoding Star Wars, and it's more than just about Star Wars, and it's going to touch on a lot of things that I think many of you will be interested in. Colin Woolford has been on the UFO scene for a long time, talking about many things, and he's been an attender here for many, many years, and we thought, you know what, it's time we got him up on the stage. And here he is. Well, he's not on the stage yet, but he will be. So a big hand for Colin Woolford.
I do appreciate everyone coming out early on a Sunday. I know it's not always easy if you've had a late night or anything like that, but I don't know how many people have ever not seen Star Wars. Does anyone want to admit to not seeing Star Wars? And I don't want to alienate you. You don't have to be interested in Star Wars to understand what I'm going to put across in this talk. And I know also, if you give the pun, alienating people who maybe are Star Trek fans. I've given a talk about Star Trek as well, so please don't think that I'm just choosing Star Wars because it's the better franchise. I love my sci-fi. It's just that for this talk, there's a lot more that I want to convey, and I hope you enjoy it. But as Andy says, I've been actually a UFO researcher for a very long time, 33 years you could say. And it's interesting that this is the 33rd year of the Glastonbury Symposium. And I think my main thing is with art, music, films, and I went on a journey. And I guess my journey kind of started with this amazing trilogy brought to us by George Lucas. This was a film of course, it came out now such a long time ago. It's May 25th, 1977. That's when it was first got its cinematic debut. It was actually not actually released in England for many people until the following year. So it was a showing in December of that year. I actually went with my dad. I remember my dad, or I could have only been about 4 or 5 at that time, believe it or not. And me and my brother were taken. And I don't think I'd ever been to a cinema, to watch a film at the cinema. And for me, even at that young age, it left a huge impression on me. Now, of course, it's seen as one of the most important films in the history of motion pictures. It's an epic space opera created by George Lucas that is set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And their plot focuses on the Rebel Alliance and its attempts to destroy the Galactic Empire's space station. That's the basic plot of the Star Wars, and it's turned into a whole franchise of other films, which I'll get into later, but that's the bare bones of it. And what's interesting is when Star Wars first came out, it didn't actually have this title. This was sort of added just before The Empire Strikes Back, I believe, came out. George had a vision, like all these great artists, people like J.K. Rowling. I also refer to people like Philip Pullman. They seem to have some sort of... They tap into something. Now, you could see this as channeling, where they're getting these information from. It's absolutely fascinating. Some people are more sinister and say, oh, the Illuminati have programmed them to say these things. But these true works of art, it lifts your spirits, lifts your soul. And for me, and for many people, Star Wars is one of the greatest pieces of art in our time, basically. And it introduces us to these characters, and you may have... These are the most well-known characters that were introduced in the first trilogy. There was a prequel trilogy, which I'll touch briefly on, and there was also a more recent Disney, more controversial for some people, sequels that came out not that long ago. But yeah, so you got Luke Skywalker. I'm sure you've heard of. That's the main... there is the whole... hero's journey. I'm not actually going to touch on that, and the idea, that Joseph Campbell, I believe, was it, who did the mythology about how, I assume that he's referring to Luke Skywalker, and he goes through his transformation, and he goes on this hero's quest. But I'm actually going to be talking a bit deeper stuff, but he is one of the main characters, although it's arguable that Darth Vader is just as relevant in the whole Star Wars trilogy and the other films as well. Princess Leia, of course, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Ben Kenobi, Chewbacca, C-3PO and R2-D2 were the 2 droids. Lando Calrissian was introduced in the Empire Strikes Back which came out in 1980. Yoda, which is like shamanic type teacher. And then we have the Emperor, which is like the main sort of bad guy behind the scenes. But what's most fascinating, really, I guess, is the Jedi Knights. And I kind of think like maybe people are expecting me to come out in my Jedi robes or something like that, lightsaber. And that's not to say I don't have these things, I actually do. And I did go to a secret Star Wars cinema showing on. I did get dressed up in my Jedi robe and my lightsaber, which I got from Woolworths many years ago. But these Jedi Knights, we're in Glastonbury, and of course, does conjure up an idea of the Templars, also the Templar Knights and things like that. But so we're bringing that. Also, of course, you've got the Arthurian legends, you've got the Knights of the Round Table, of course. So it's very interesting that this concept was brought across in the films. So who are the Jedi? When they basically study and utilize the Force in order to help and protect those in need. The Jedi members, known as Jedi Knights, respect all life, but by defending and protecting those who cannot do it for themselves, striving for peaceful and non-combative solutions to any altercations they encounter, and fighting only in self-defense and for the defense of those they protect. Like their evil counterparts, the Sith, which is an interesting anagram of that word, their main weapon is the lightsaber. By training the mind and the body, the Jedi seek to improve themselves by gaining unfettered access to the Force, while also seeking to improve those individuals and groups they come in contact with. So yeah, that does sound very much like, the Noble Knights Templar and the Round Table, and it's interesting that concept is put across in the films. And of course there is the whole concept of the Force, which I always felt was kind of interchangeable with the word source. I always make the joke that would have been a better word to use, but then I'm thinking, use the source doesn't really quite sound the same as using the Force. They'd be more an advert for like Heinz ketchup or something like that. But the idea of the source and the Force is sort of filled around us that we can tap into. It's just fascinating, and it really did speak to a lot of people. But of course, there is deeper stuff in Star Wars, and what I found, I had some experiences, I guess you could call like downloads, information towards the end of the 1990s, when I was having some experiences and coming across information, looking deeper and questioning some of the wordings and names, especially in the Star Wars, but also things in music as well. But that's another talk. But so, as I said, the Jedi, we might wonder where that word comes from. A lot what I find encoded in the films are interesting little sort of leads you into, that word sounds a bit like that word. Why did they use that word? It's very interesting. And we have the Jed pillar, which is one of the most ancient symbols found in Egyptian mythology. So that's kind of interesting. There's a connection there. And it's an ancient symbol that represents balance. It's associated with the creator god Osiris. It's understood to represent his spine. So that's kind of interesting as well, so that these knights stand for something noble and, like creator sort of god aspect. Now, next thing I want to convey is how symbols can mean something small that's represented as a character in a film can represent something very big. And maybe this was a good example that I thought of that the Egyptians used, keeping on that theme. And it was the idea that the dung beetles were sacred in ancient Egypt. Their dung rolling was linked with the nocturnal activity of Khepri, the god of the rising sun. Khepri was supposed to roll the sun through the underworld at night, pushing it over the horizon in the morning. So for the Egyptians, this had huge meaning, like the sun being represented by that. This is the sort of way I want you to think in how I reach the conclusions regarding the characters and the larger nature and what they represent. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Robert Preval, who suggested the pyramids represent Orion's belt and the River Nile, the Milky Way galaxy, and Gary King touched on some of this yesterday, and other speakers have talked about other things I'm going to talk about in my talk, which is very synchronous. So as above, so below. So again, something small represented by the microcosm and the macrocosm. But the big story in Star Wars really is this, you could, like I said at the beginning, for some it's the story of Luke Skywalker, but really the Anakin Skywalker is seen as the main sort of protagonist and maybe the hero in the end, if you have seen the whole trilogy, because he kind of redeems himself at the end. He kind of turns to the dark side. Now, I'm making a connection here between this name. So we got Anakin Skywalker, which can't be a coincidence. So I'm looking at names, okay? So I don't. If you've heard of the Anunnaki, I'm assuming many of you have heard of the ancient astronaut theories and the idea that the Mesopotamian gods, the Anunnaki. And it's interesting that Skywalker implies someone who walks amongst the sky. One of the first names for the military used was fast walkers, interesting, when they identified UFOs. So kind of interesting symbolism here. So I'm saying that Skywalker is representing this character of the Anunnaki. So who are the Anunnaki? They were a group of deities that appear in the mythologies of the ancient Sumerians. It was said Namu gave birth to An, and Ki gave birth to Enlil, who claimed the earth and his domain. Humans were believed to have been created by Enki, the son of Namu and An. The Akkadian civilization later called An, Anu, and Enki. So some people may be, like I say, aware of the Enki story, and it's fascinating for me. I definitely believe that this is encoded into this, and this was the proponent of these books. And interesting, Zachariah Sitchin, this was actually written, I guess, at the same time that George Lucas was making his film, because it was 1976. I said 1977 was when George Lucas brought out his film. So there's all that synchronous of time happening at the same time. And he claimed that in his book that the Anunnaki were actually a race of extraterrestrial beings from the planet Nibiru who came to the Earth around 500,000 years ago to mine gold. He claims that he genetically engineered Homo erectus to create modern humans to work as slaves. Sitchin believed that Anunnaki built the pyramids and all the other monumental structures from around the world that ancient astronaut theorists consider so impossible to build without highly advanced technology. It's very interesting. Some people, dispute this, obviously, but that was what was on the zeitgeist at the time around that. So I've got some Dutch friends here at the front, and I know for a fact that Vader in Dutch does mean father, doesn't it? Correct? Right. So that's kind of interesting. There's lots of stuff encoded into Star Wars, and that's just some little things like that. I believe there's so much more to encode from it. Darth is actually more of a title, if you believe the Star Wars lore. But it's not too far to sort of reach that it's sort of like a dark father and dressed in black. He didn't seem like the good guy, did he? But so who is? I'm going to be. I probably haven't. I mean, the film came out in 1980, so I hope I'm not spoiling things here. It's like 43 years later. But I'm here to tell you that at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker, who is this young farm boy who grows up on Tatooine, he's confronted by this menacing character, Darth Vader, and he tells him that he is his father, which is quite a big shock at the time. It's still one of the great movie twists, I guess you could plot twists of all time. So what is the meaning behind that? You have to remember, I was studying UFOs at this time in the 90s, so I was very well aware of some interesting characters. I wanted to know more about what was going on. I kind of got tired of seeing, stories about UFOs. I wanted to know more. I started getting into contactees, channeled books, and you can have your opinions about that. And it's still very controversial, but there's still many people today who talk about all sorts of contact with people from various star systems, such as the Pleiades and things like that. This gentleman was one of the ones, though, I was following. He was one of the main ones out there bringing forth so much information. He's still with us, but sadly not too well now. He claimed that the Anunnaki were left in charge of the various minions we now see running the planet. And he claims the Anunnaki actually turned to the light in 1994, throwing the cabal, which he says was running this planet. It's widely seen now what we have a deep state cabal running things here, but that these Anunnaki, these off-planet beings, the Anunnaki, who didn't really seem to have an interest in heart, although maybe a certain faction did. Now, this is a still from one of his lectures, and it's very interesting because it talks about the human origins, which apparently began in the Vega, in the Lyra constellation. And he says here, the dinosaurs and the reptilians claimed ownership of the entire galaxy. The galactic humans and their allies disagreed, and this resulted in a galactic war that lasted millions of years. And this is very interesting. Also, I should bring up, have anyone read The Dark Materials by Philip Pullman? So Lyra is interesting, and that might be your gateway for looking into that, because that could be another talk in the future, because there's so much in that book. But it's the sheer fact that you will find that many channeled information would address that the origins of humanity did actually come from Lyra, in that, or rather Vega, which is in the Lyra constellation. It's just another little fascinating anecdote. And of course, there's always been claims about the dinosaurians and reptilians. Regardless of what you think about that, you can't ignore the fact in the UFO subject, they are seen as sort of the more aggressive race, if you even believe that they exist. It's just fascinating to take on board all these fantastic stories and information. And one of the other fascinating sci-fi things that came out of Star Wars, I should just briefly add, was Battlestar Galactica. It was almost, I think they ended up trying to sue, the maker was Glenn A. Larson, who was a producer. He was actually a Mormon, and he created this series that came out about 1978, I believe. Very much sort of would seem to be based on lots of the themes of Star Wars. But what was very interesting on that, they had this intro, and I don't even remember Battlestar Galactica. They always said at the beginning, there was like a narration. I think it was Patrick McNee, I'm not sure. But he said, at the start of each episode, he said, there are those who believe that life here began out there, far across the universe, with tribes of humans who may have been the forefathers of the Egyptians or the Toltecs or the Mayans. They may have been the architects of the Great Pyramids or the lost civilization of Lemuria or Atlantis. Some believe that there may yet be brothers of man who even now fight to survive far away amongst the stars. So, like I say, a lot of art, I believe, regardless, it doesn't have to be Star Wars, it can be so many other things, it has higher truths encoded in them. And another one with the Battlestar Galactica was it was basically about 12 colonies of mankind. They were reaching an end of a 1,000-year war with the Cylons. They were warrior robots created by a reptilian race which expired long ago, presumably destroyed by their own creation. And they begin a quest to find the 13th tribe of humanity, and that, of course, involves the legendary planet Earth. So I just wanted to bring that across because it does tie in with the old ancient astronauts, and that was being encoded into other films and TV shows at the time. But the basic crux of the thing is, was there a war amongst the stars? And I guess it could be more obvious than to have the word Star Wars. I mean, what else does it imply? A war amongst the stars. So it's, staring you right in the face, really, if you believe that there is truth. And people will say stuff about the asteroid belt being, destroyed, and there was previous battles and all things like that, Maldak, and there's all these stories. Now, the fall of Anakin Skywalker. Now, if, as I say, Darth Vader represents the Anunnaki, ET beings, then we can assume Luke, being his son, represents mankind. So I'm talking these high concepts here. Now, the 9 Skywalker implies that those that walk among the clouds, space beings. In a confrontation between Darth Vader and Luke, seen at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, we see the shock as the truth is revealed to Luke, which I say is humanity, that this dark being is in fact his father, the Anunnaki responsible for genetic meddling in the creation of present humanity. So, and I'm just going to put in some slides here because over the years, Star Wars has been used for lots of memes and things. And I know there's a very controversial subject, but I know a lot of people do question still things like 9/11. And there's a famous scene in the beginning of Star Wars where Luke's aunt and uncle are murdered, and they are made to seem to be being murdered by these Tusken Raiders, these sand people. And you got this meme that came out not too long after 2001 because it was said that these were Arabic terrorists and that they did what they did. But a lot of people are very suspicious of that, and many people today think that was either an inside job, but there were elements of some cabal who are organizing such atrocities for their own hideous agendas. So it's kind of interesting how these, so it's just an interesting photo I just wanted to add in there. Those blast points were too accurate for sand people, exactly, and many people do question it. I know that's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. So Luke Skywalker, he was like the main hero of this, I guess, in some ways. And there's a beautiful scene, and it's still one of the most powerful scenes in cinema history for me. And especially if you're growing up and you're wondering what your place in the universe is, And it's this beautiful scene with this binary sunset, and when they play this fourth theme, and if I could play a piece of music, I would play that thing, because it's such an emotive piece of music, and it's such an emotive scene where you're looking at your life and what's ahead of you and wondering what your place is in the universe. So for me, it's a very spiritual film as well, not just because of what I'm saying here, but it really does touch the soul for me. And so what do other characters represent? I said about Darth Vader representing the father aspect and of mankind, or the Dark Father, Luke Skywalker, let's say, is humanity. Then who are the other characters? So we have on the left Harrison Ford playing Han Solo, Carrie Fisher playing Princess Leia, and we have Mark Hamill playing Luke Skywalker. These were like the three main characters, I guess you could say. So, like I say, with the Pleiades, it was very interesting because it had been something that was also talked about with the likes of Billy Meyer and other contactees. But certainly the Pleiades is often mentioned for channel. I think Barbara Hanclough, did a book. And what I found interesting then, when I closely examined some of the names, I found like there was deeper truths, symbolism and secrets in there. And one of the great problems of writing the word Pleiades was many people don't always get the spelling wrong. So when I found out there was like something that seemed to imply is it's encoded in it, I never got the spelling wrong because I knew it was the same as Princess Leia. And I guess you could take the P and add it to Leia, and it's kind of interesting. You think, well, that's kind of interesting. It might have some relevance there. It's a token lady in this film. There wasn't too many women represented, but I'll get on to another important one later on. It wasn't. I mean, this is going back into the late 70s, and it was a different time then, but some very important concepts were put across. Now, I've added a bit here, which is the name Mon, and if you know the Return of the Jedi, they were introduced a whole bunch of characters with this prefix Mon. So what I've done here, I've added this onto Solo and made it Solomon, which you think, well, why have you done that? It's kind of interesting, but what's the relevance of it? So what I'm saying is there evidence in the Star Wars movies that the character of Han Solo is implied to be a descendant of the biblical bloodline of David and Solomon? Is Han Solo portrayed as Jesus in The Empire Strikes Back? And that's quite a controversial thing to say, but I'm up here saying it, so that's what I'm saying. But and I don't know why that would. Maybe it's because some people think, well, obviously he's a godlike being. Maybe I actually think it makes him more of an interesting character, that Jesus was. I mean, if you believe in Jesus, I know some people don't think that was a real person, but I think there's enough stories and truth out there that there was someone that was around back in those days, and it's just fascinating, and I'm going to go into why I think there's a connection there. So this film is widely seen as the biggest, the most important Star Wars film for many people, their favourite one. Maybe because it had quite a more darker tone to it, and it finished on a bit of a cliffhanger, but that came out in 1980. Now, there was a scene in The Empire Strikes Back where Lando Calrissian, who I mentioned, he was introduced into this film as a friend of Han Solo, and they end up in this cloud city of Bespin. And it turns out that the Empire, the stormtroopers, they're the guards of the Imperial Empire, he kind of like double-crosses Han Solo. He does a deal with Darth Vader, and there's a scene where he is handed over, and it's, again, another very powerful scene. So there's some debate over, of course, of Judas, a character in the Bible, and I'm not a Bible scholar or anything like that. I've not read the Bible, but I'm familiar with all the religions and things. Some people say that Judas wasn't quite the bad guy as he's been told in our history, and maybe there was some actual something, they could have been much closer and friends even. It's just something to consider. I'm just putting it out there, okay, because it's interesting how Lando then comes into, or at least in the next film, as one of the heroes. So it's just something to consider. So he then is being seen as being tortured, and you could argue is this a representation of even Jesus on the cross or something like that? But this is before he was about to be taken. This is a scene just before he's taken into this place, which is a carbon freezing chamber. And I'm sort of implying here that you could imply, the Empire, you could see it as relevant today, the people controlling this planet. Back then, you could say it was representing the Roman soldiers. So was this scene a representation of Jesus and Mary, because Princess Leia, obviously, she was falling for Han Solo, and there's a whole idea. I don't need to go into all the details of the idea that Jesus and Mary had sons, daughters, the bloodline of Jesus, and there's plenty of books about that. So again, I'm just putting it out there. I'm not saying that this Han Solo, she was from Pleiades, but I'm open to the idea that the disciples and things like that can be star people, and that there is some deeper meaning to it all. So again, another powerful scene where the crucifix. I think this is a depiction, and this is one of the downloads that really sort of I feel like I got at the time, which made me. I just found it so profound that I just thought that has to be a representation of the crucifixion. Whether you believe it even happened, a lot of people don't even think that the crucifixion happened. And I'm open to that as well, because there's a whole debate about that. But the fact is that many people accept that it did happen, and maybe that's the important thing, that so many people, whether it actually did or not, accept that there was such a thing that did go on. So what was interesting, it wasn't the end of Han Solo, that was the good news, so you could say the same about Jesus, I guess. And in Return of the Jedi, he's actually brought back to life. He was actually frozen, so it was like it was like a trial, because they were going to do the same to Luke Skywalker, but in Return of the Jedi, he was brought back and resurrected, you could say. And there he is reunited with Princess Leia. I put that one in there just as there's that debate about the Turin Shroud, and some people say that's bogus, and I just thought, that's kind of interesting. That's something that kind of looked a bit like that. I don't know, but I just put it in there. But then we move on to the big other film, which was The Return of the Jedi. This was the end of the trilogy, the original 3 trilogy that George Lucas came up with. And again, I talk about the Jed pillar and the idea of Osiris, or the return of the balance, the return of the truth, and even the return of the star people, because of all the UFO sightings we're getting now, and the crop circle phenomenon. That's all tied in for me. This came out in 1983, and what was so fascinating about this was this film. It just had its. I actually saw it was the anniversary this year, actually, and I went to see it in my local cinema complex, so it was good to see it back on the big screen. 40th year anniversary. And they introduced these interesting characters, that alien races, and of course there was alien races in Star Wars, as we know, but particular intention is these beings on the left are like aquatic type beings. We have this lady here. She's, I'm going to introduce her in a minute, but she's like the supreme sort of head of the Rebel Alliance. And then this guy on the right, General Madine. And these are very relevant from what I'm about to say. So here we go. Now, for some reason, that woman who's the supreme leader of the Rebel Alliance I go back to the word Mon, and I've just got to tell you this quick story about Mon, because it's relevant to why I'm going to talk. Basically, Mon is an interesting word that I've been fascinated by a long time. I read all the Peter Moon books. He did a book about the Montauk, which is on New York East, the end of New York. And there was all these stories. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Montauk Project and all those stories. They made Stranger Things. They turned it into a TV show, which is very popular. It's basically about a mind control experiments that they were doing over a period of time, and quite sort of very, very dark stuff, basically going, possibly using children. Some people tie that in also with the Philadelphia experiment, the idea that we were doing time travel things, and all sorts of really dark stuff. But the word Mon, I think Peter Moon best explained it, and from what I remember in his book was that he kind of implied that the word, and it's also an ancient, Montauk is actually an ancient Native American name that comes from that. But Mon implies that it was a hidden god aspect, which is fascinating. I added Solo to Solomon. Now, the interesting aspect here is that she's actually a human, as we go back, and yet these beings are the Mon Calamari, which are like a fish-type being. So it's kind of, no one's actually ever explained in Star Wars, how is she connected? She's clearly not a fish-type being, and yet she's got that same prefix, which is fascinating, and no one's actually ever explained that. Now, the guy, Admiral Akbar, I'm not even sure if he's there, actually. They all look pretty similar to me, but that's another very interesting word. We'll get onto Islam. We'll go onto Islam in a minute. General Madine, and I'm going to explain deeper about that. Now, I'm going to jump to this UFOs. At this time, I was doing a lot of UFO research I picked up this in The Forbidden Planet, which is a bookstore in London. Tottenham Court Road it was back then, and it was a fascinating thing. I was looking for information, I was telling you about the channelings and things like that, and I thought, oh, this is very interesting. It's like a pamphlet. It was only like 40 pages and that, but just just reading it, and it was absolutely fascinating. And it was the blurb is that it was on a hot summer night in 1993. The author was sleeping in the wood near his home in Canada. Suddenly, the night air filled with a strange sound, and a glowing object hovered nearby. Tony established a telepathic bond with the ETs inside the craft, who continued to communicate with him via messages actually mailed and left in his mailbox. So there wasn't some sort of channeling, it was actually getting this correspondence in his postbox. Now, here is proof ETs mean us no harm and have a strong spiritual message for Earthlings. So this guy referred to himself as Mr. X, this mysterious person, and he was conversing with Tony. After his sightings, Tony went on to receive messages in his post from who he conversed with. Mr. X knew all about his UFO sighting. Mr. X was born on Earth, he claimed, but had memory of a life before amongst the stars. Mr. X claims every person on this planet is an Anunnaki Earth-human hybrid. Mr. X goes on to reveal a lot about mankind's history. See the Doma Way website, and I'm going to go into that, what that is in a second. So a quote from Mr. X says, almost all this is already out there. I'm just putting it all together for you. Over the years, a lot of this was subliminally introduced into man's reality. The methods varied from songs to movies to books, etc. The trick was to introduce knowledge without scaring people. Some of your greatest artists and writers were contributors. The two songs are an example, because he's referring to a conversation he had about Peter Gabriel, Salisbury Hill, and Phil Collins' Take Me Home. But there's a whole rabbit hole about music, and maybe in the future I can do a talk about the music, the deeper meaning of song lyrics and things like that. Now, June is about as close as you'll get to history of the collective and the future of mankind. This is fascinating because I know Andy talked about June yesterday, and you have to remember, June came out in 1965. It was Frank Herbert. And has anyone actually read the book? I haven't read it myself, but I have seen the film. I suppose people may have seen the film. And the second part of a new adaptation is coming out this year. I think Paul Verhoeven did that. And I've enjoyed both versions. There was a 1980 version with Sting in it. But the book, it was like a whole series of books, but very, very interesting, and then some very deep concepts. There was a guy who was Paul Atreides. He was seen as a messiah character for certain inhabitants of a planet, and there was this female matriarchal society called the Ben Gesserit, and just keep that in mind, just because I'm going to touch on that later on. So. And it was very much it used Muslim references in the book as well. I should add that. It's very important that I'm going to cover some of the religious aspects of this subject as relating to ufology. And it's interesting that like the ideas of Islam, the Mahdi, the savior, this Paul Atreides, and all sorts of concepts, and the jihad and things like that. But as Andy says, then, check out that book. And as Mr. X here says, Dune is about as close as you'll get to a history of the collective and the future of mankind. So this is very important, okay? This is when I didn't think, we didn't have the internet back in the mid-90s. When I got these messages, I thought, wow, is that it? Because there seemed to be so much more, and I thought, I couldn't find anything. I just couldn't find any more information about what it was saying, about the claims, and I thought, well, when I did get on the internet, probably the late 90s, I did find out there was a website. Now, just if you want to find this website, if you put in, not the Doma Way, but put in the way and then the word Doma, D-O-M-A, which is the Daughters of Mary. It's very absolute. If you want to go down a rabbit hole then, and you've got a couple of weeks to spare about the religious UFO and actual references to aspects of sacred texts, not just Islam, Buddhism, the Bible. It's absolutely fascinating. And a lot of UFO researchers don't even know about this, even though, this is going back to the 90s, and it's always, for me, was a very profound thing when I printed out every page of it at the time. So what they said was, on the website, was the coming of the Elohim. Over 50,000 years ago, the planet Earth was visited by a race of beings from what is known as the collective. The collective is comprised of many different races who work together for their mutual benefit. All of these races, with but one exception of the human species, These humans are the same genetically as those found on the Earth. They are from the main colony zones, Sirius, Orion, and Pleiades. And again, these three you'll find pop up very often in the contactee lore, being from Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades. That's just a chapter index. I just put it in there to give you an idea what they cover. It's very, very deep about religion, very spiritual. So it talks about angels, the Messiah projects, Jesus, the son of Isis, and there's Buddha, the son of Maya. There's a chapter that they didn't release about the Islam because it was quite, I think, a tense time, even before things like 9/11 and stuff like that. But I'm going to go a bit more into that. So they claimed that the Earth was visited by a combined mining and exploration force, 52,000 BC. These were humans from three colony zones, Sirius, Orion, the Pleiades. They genetically altered the indigenous pre-human animal existing here at the time. There was a great war fought on this planet between two factions of this group. And for some people that might be considered, Enki, and Enlil. But there was also a female. One of the things that comes across in this, that there was an overruling thing where the females on both sides actually interceded, so that the females actually won the war. So the female side won, and as a result, it was decided to try and train the Earth people in the art of civilization. Now, various teachers were sent throughout history to introduce a progressive system of moral and social guidelines. Like these beings, they were immediately deified. For the last 10,000 years, man has been guided towards civilization. This is quite profound. He talks about original sin. The first sin was not mankind's, it was the Elohim's. They genetically altered man for the purpose of slave labor and to enlarge their own vanity. The ability to conceive was increased from a yearly cycle to a lunar-based one. A war over this was won by a group of females. These women are now in charge of all Earth-related projects. They are known as the daughters of Ma. And once again, if you want to find that, if you type in Google the way and then the word Domo, that should bring it up second or third search. Now, Mr. X continues, the leader of the females is the daughter of a Syrian family. Her name is Ma Ra Ash. On Earth, she was called many names. She was worshipped as a goddess. She was called Ma, Ash, Ish, Isis, Mara, Mary. The Elohim is the combined name of the ruling families. The rest are the Anunnaki. The book of Genesis, it's very interesting, isn't it? Lots of this is encoded. Now, some famous imagery there of Stella Marie and Our Lady of Fatima. One of the fascinating accounts, obviously you may be aware of the Miracle of the Sun, which was 13th of October, 1917, which was the apparitions of Fatima. Now, many people see that as a UFO event, and I'm kind of inclined to go along with that. The Dogma material actually implied that the 13 was a number for the goddess, and with 13 we see actually come up quite a lot, with such as like the Knights, like Jesus and his disciples, the 12, and Jesus being the 13. So very interesting that there was this Fatima. And one of the things that also that they mention is that links, because it was obviously a Catholic, it was seen as a major Catholic event, but what they said in the Dogma material is there was a reason it appeared in Fatima, because Fatima is actually a Muslim name, which is fascinating when you think about it. For what it is for, the Catholic faith, it's actually appeared in a place which is Islamic. So is there some sort of bigger thing going on behind the scenes there, sort of, that's all going to come together at one point in the future, possibly? And I just want to say also there was around this time there was a massive on the 13th again it was another massive, one of the most famous UFO sightings appeared in Phoenix, Arizona in 1997, and that was the Phoenix Lights, you may remember. And there was some sort of, because this internet website, it all stopped around 1990, just before 97, and they did sort of predict that there would be a major sighting on the 13th of Mun, and people would now say that was referencing the Phoenix Lights. I don't know, for what it's worth, just interesting, and that's the cosmic version of Isis. So the Sirius mystery, I'm going to tie it back to the Sirius, because that for me is one of the closest, my most interesting aspects of this subject. And just a year before Star Wars came out, you had Robert Temple bringing out the Sirius mystery. And it's basically, it talks about, was Earth visited by intelligent beings from a planet in the system. The book represents the hypothesis that the Dogon people of Mali and West Africa preserve a tradition of contact with intelligent extraterrestrial beings from the Sirius star system. These beings, who are hypothesized to have taught the arts of civilization to humans, are claimed in the book to have originated the systems of the pharaohs of Egypt, the mythology of Greek civilizations, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, among others. The mystery that is central to the book is how the Dogon allegedly acquired knowledge of Sirius B, the white dwarf companion star of Sirius A, invisible to the naked eye. There's a little saying that I don't remember that in Return of the Jedi, where the Ewoks, I'm going to go into in a little minute, where the heroes are captured, but then sort of C-3PO appears, and he's seen as like, I guess how we would see it now, like some being from the stars. It's like a total alien to them, this golden creature, robot, and they interpret him as a god. I do believe they think I'm some sort of god, and that's fascinating because a lot of indigenous tribes would, obviously, when we did the colonization, they were seen as gods. So it's just that aspect, that little story I like to show that. But going back to the Nomo and the fish god, it implies that there's actually some drawings that the Nomo done. So it implies I'm going back to this thing that we're talking about, the Mon Calamari. I'm going to bring it back to calamari is obviously associated with the fish. So the other names were, he was the Nomo, the fish god, Enki, Oannes. Now, Enki is also considered to be the one who imparts the knowledge of civilizations to mankind. He was also known as the Babylonians as Oannes and to the Egyptians as Ptah. He was a god of wisdom and knowledge, and throughout times his symbol has been the snake. According to Sumerian texts, Enki was the one who instructed Noah to build the ark so humanity could be saved. This was in direct defiance of the orders of Enlil, who desired the destruction of humanity. It brings up all that idea of the serpent and things like that, and it's kind of interesting. There is reason to believe Enki symbolizes the Syrian presence on Earth. His symbol is a snake or serpent. Snake, however, is also refers to the inhabitants of Sirius. The title Lord of the Seas, too, has a link with the watery worlds in the Syrian system, the whales and the dolphins. According to Earth's galactic history, the Syrians were the ones who helped mankind survive the Great Flood. So when I was watching these, looking back and finding these interesting encoded information, I thought it can't be a coincidence that these beings are introduced in Return of the Jedi, and they're flying in these big starships. So I'm saying there's a link here between what we see in Robert Temple's book and these galactic race that are represented in Return of the Jedi. But again, we go back to Mon Mothma. Now, the name Mothma is interesting because obviously you got the name, you could take Mov for mother, and then Ma, of course, is like the female equivalent of Ra, Ma-Ra. So again, it's sort of like a free trigger thing for me. It's got the mother bit, it's got the Ma, the supreme, like Virgin Mary, or that's, the ISIS, the leader of the Rebel Alliance, the one who's sort of watching over us, perhaps from the stars, and the Syrian star nation and other star nations as well. Just fascinating. But there's this other character that was also introduced. I thought, well, if there's names that are there, and Crix is interesting. Could be something to do with crucifix, something to do with Jesus as well. No coincidence. Everything I find it has meaning. But Mahdi was very interesting. So again, we go back to the Islamic faith and Mahdi. I got that from that. So the Mahdi, which we'll talk about. Who is the Mahdi? The Mahdi is an eschatological redeemer of Islam who will appear and will rule for 5, 7, 9, or 19 years, according to differing interpretations, before the day of judgment, and will rid the world of evil. In most traditions, Mahdi will arrive with Jesus to defeat the false Messiah or the Antichrist. So going back to the Mahdi, he says, now he reveals himself that Mr. X, he actually says, he is the Mahdi, believe it for what it's worth. So this is interesting. Some of the way installments he talks about dealt with the Messiah projects. These, of course, were the special people chosen by the Doma to teach mankind the word of God: Buddha, Jesus, and finally Muhammad, the last prophet of God. Each of these great men brought to the world a little piece of the puzzle. They left you a little more aware, a little more human, a little more closer to the one. Each of these men knew that it would be a long time before Earth humans were capable of taking all the knowledge they had given them and making it a reality in their lives. There was simply too much growing up to do in terms of scientific knowledge, social development, and spiritual evolvement. You were simply not ready then to learn of your true origins, nor of the Doma. So they spoke to you in terms that you could understand in parables and metaphors and mysteries to be solved at a later date, at a later time. At that time has now arrived. So it's fascinating, and you can see that through consciousness we've come so far in even the last 2,000 years. We've got things like the internet now, and things seem to be speeding up, that so much knowledge is out there. So this totally resonates with me, that, just in the Bible you've got parables and things like that, higher truths. We're seeing it now in books, films, songs. And of course, I had to bring this up because before I even did this tour, The Mandalorian hadn't even come out. So there was lots of spin-offs from Star Wars, and it's fascinating that when The Mandalorian came out in 2019, he was this offshoot character from the Star Wars stories. And they had a code of honor, and they always talk about this is the way. And I thought, wow, what are the chances of that? You got the dome away, and he's talking about this is the way. And it's just, I just think the coincidence. This can't be a coincidence. But going back to Admiral Akbar, now I'm going to get onto the Islamic bit, which is very interesting. Now, Admiral Akbar is an interesting name. Obviously, it implies that it's an admiral, someone of a seafaring fleet, albeit amongst the stars. And of course, Allahu Akbar, you may have heard that word in the news. It's usually used to say God is great, and it's an expression of Islamic, expression of faith. So it's very interesting. Why is this encoded into a fish-type being in Return of the Jedi? Again, it seems to secure the idea of the connection with the subject of Islam and some truth to all these great teachers. But behind the scenes, there was this guy, the Emperor. He was behind everything and running the things. And this was the guy, so it was Palpatine, basically, a galactic senator, and secretly Darth Sidious. He was revealed in the prequels, because there was 3 other films. Now, though outwardly appearing to be a well-intentioned public servant and supporter of democracy prior to becoming emperor, is actually Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith, a cult of practitioners of the dark side of the Force, previously thought to have been extinct for a millennium in the Star Wars galaxy. As Sidious, he instigates the Clone Wars, nearly destroys the Jedi, and transforms the Republic into an empire. He manipulates Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker into turning to the dark side and serving at his side as Darth Vader. Palpatine's reign is brought to an end when Vader kills him to save Luke Skywalker. This is an old picture. I think he's dead now, but it was always funny how that picture always looked so much like him. And people do see the Vatican as the root of all evil. I'm sure they've kept so many secrets regarding the UFO subject, and we can't really trust any of these sort of characters. So towards the end of the film, you see Anunnaki. Like I said at the beginning, Sheldon talks about how the Anunnaki turn to the light, and this is what very much happens at the end, because when the Anunnaki, or Anakin Skywalker, sees, you could argue, Luke Skywalker as representing mankind, he has that sort of connection, and they realize the error of their ways, that they genetically engineered us, they installed a cabal. When the Anunnaki did return to the light, they left the cabal kind of in charge. But I think this scene where Darth Vader sort of turns to the light at the end and overthrows the Emperor, it's all like it brings everything back into balance again. And there's also that, the whole idea known as the Book of Revelations about the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. And that's one of the scenes at the end of Return of the Jedi. Very much interesting. In the Doma material, they actually say the Book of Revelations is not about the future at all. It's about the previous battle for this planet in the past. So that's very interesting. But we all know that things are very cyclical, and there's all that stuff about, the mark of the beast. So now I go into all what we've been through in the last few years, and maybe there's more stuff to come. But it's funny how history seems to repeat itself with these dark characters. But so when at the end of the film, Luke confronts his father, and he overthrows the Emperor. And I do believe this is important, that to have this aspect of us, where forgiveness is the key, because I think we're all being tested at this time, that there's very negative, dark things going on. It's easy to get angry, lose your way, and lose your self-worth. And there is something to forgiveness. It's a very powerful message. And he sort of, he's reunited with his father, and it is a sort of a very happy ending. But there was this battle in Endor at the same time that was going on, this confrontation between Darth Vader and Luke and the Emperor. And is this analogy for Earth? Could Endor be representing Earth? Are the Ewoks We're up against the Illuminati, the New World Order with their advanced technologies. Are we the Ewoks? I think we kind of are in a way. And that's representing of a rebel fleet. All these UFO sightings now being seen. As we've known this weekend, there's so many talks about sightings of UFOs. I don't go along with it. It's all good, and it's all good out there. There's clearly other agendas and things going on, but it's fascinating that this is shown in the end of the film. The final battle. Are we in the final battle? I think we are. We generally are. But at the end, Return of John, it's very happy. It's like a galactic reunion, and it's a very positive end. And for me, it's such a heartwarming film. And the important thing is a happy end, but it wasn't quite the end, because there was all these other films that came out: The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, A New Hope, The Emperor Strikes Back. I'm just going to fast forward these. I know I've only got just over 10 minutes, so I'm just going to go through these slides because it is kind of relevant, and there is some deeper aspects of Star Wars. It was The Phantom Menace, the idea of false flags. I kind of find it interesting how just names of titles you can get information from. And we're talking about Gary, I think it was yesterday, talking about Qui-Gon Jinn. This is one of the characters Liam Neeson played in. It's absolutely, Ewan McGregor played a young Ben Kenobi. Alec Guinness was the original Ben Kenobi. But now, Qui-Gon, just as Gary was saying, life energy is a holistic system of coordinated body posture. So it's very fascinating. This name is used as one of the characters. George Lucas was doing the prequels. So again, there's information encoded in that. And according to Taoist, Buddhist, and Confucian philosophy, Qui-Gon allows access to higher realms of awareness, awakens one's true nature, and helps human potential. Jar Jar Binks was a character introduced, and he was seen as very much a joke. And people thought, well, this is not good. This is like kid and child. But again, there was deeper stuff included because it's a Syrian word that children would talk about, Jar, and this is some of the Syrian language that children would talk about. So, he would say Salamat Jarin, which would be blessings. So Jar Jar Binks, it's a very sort of loving sort of character, and I think if they'd actually look into it, they would find that there's so much deeper stuff going on. Now, someone from Vanity said, Jar Jar, he's just come to symbolise what many fans see as faults of the prequel trilogy. Characters no one much cares about, a sense of humour geared towards the youngest conceivable audience, an over-reliance on computer graphics, storylines, the kinds of convoluted political machinations which wouldn't have been out of place in adaptations of I, Claudius or The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which fit less snugly in films with characters like Jar Jar. But Attack of the Clones, again, there's all sorts of claims about clones and things that have been going on the years, and I'm sure we're not being told, and who knows just how deep that goes. But the fact it's encoded in the name of one of the Star Wars films, and they bring up that subject. Now, in Attack of the Clones, Jar Jar is a delegate to the Galactic Senate. Later on the behalf of Naboo, he gives a speech to the assembled Senate in favour of granting Chancellor Palpatine vast emergency powers. Palpatine, of course, would turn into the Emperor. These are granted, giving Palpatine the power he needs to subsequently overthrow the Senate and bring the galaxy into the dictatorial control of the Sith's galactic empire. And George Lucas himself said about all this political aspect on the prequels, he said, all democracies turn into dictatorships, but not by coup. The people give their democracy to a dictator, whether it's Julius Caesar or Napoleon or Adolf Hitler. Ultimately, the general population goes along with the idea. What kind of things push people and institutions in this direction? That's the issue I've been exploring. How did the Republic turn into the Empire? How does a good person go bad? And how does a democracy become a dictatorship? Thank you. Right on time, thank you. So Revenge of the Sith, that was the third part of the first prequels. Probably one of the best ones out of the three if people... And it was this all stuff like Order 66, where they would activate these clones and they'd murder these young Jedi children who were studying. It's kind of... Order 60 was built into the clone troopers of the Grand Army of the Republic during the cloning process that created them. All clones were given a biochip, one that would be activated by remote order via voice command. Chief Palpatine, for example, only needed to tell clones to execute Order 66, and the order was carried out. The biochip, when activated, would ensure total obedience in the clone, erasing existing biases and beliefs. The order would also cause the clones to view the Jedi as a dangerous threat that needed to be eliminated at all costs. And then we got the idea that something in the future where we're not... You see the vaccine, the virus, and all that sort of stuff, and maybe people have been chipped in some ways. You always hear about these false flag, terrible shootings in America. It does make you wonder how people are getting activated, whether these people are just crazy or if there is something more sinister going on. So we need to be aware of that. And of course, so then the other films came out. So we had there was this big gap then after the prequels. It came back with The Force Awakens. And it does divide opinion, these films. I know it's not for everyone, and I generally do like the original, but there's still stuff to be had from Star Wars, and it still means much more, especially to a younger audience as well. The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker. But I'm just going to leave you with some. I managed to get this far, and I haven't really mentioned Yoda, which I kind of realised the mistake I made in previous talk. How can I miss out one of the great characters of Star Wars and give you some Yoda wisdom here? And no one said it, but he's like a shaman type character who teaches Luke in the ways of the Force, and a quote: "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." It's quite profound stuff. So some more wisdom of Yoda for you. Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, consume you. It will. Don't worry, I won't do the Yoda impersonation. You can do that yourself, okay? No. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. And it's like the idea of a physical and spiritual. When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not. Truly wonderful the mind of a child is. The simple truths. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Judge me by my size, do you? He's like a little guy. Wars not make one great. Very true indeed. Clear your mind must be if you are to find the villains behind this plot. And very much tapping into conspiracies, I think, kind of always two there are, no more, no less, a master and apprentice. Always pass on what you have learned. Mind what you have learned. Save you it can. To answer power with power, the Jedi way, this is not. In this war, a danger there is of losing who we are, and that's so often true, isn't it, when we end up in war situations. Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed that is. In the end, cowards are those who follow the dark side. Very true. So certain were you. Go back and closer you must look. Very true about a lot of things. When you examine something, you find out it's not always what you think it is. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose. When you look at the dark side, careful you must be, for the dark side looks back. You will find only what you bring in. And this is an interesting scene in The Empire Strikes Back, because when he's gone to Dagobah to see Yoda, he does his training, and he goes into this cave, and he's confronted by Darth Vader, and he strikes him down, and it turns out when his mask is revealed, it's actually his own face. It's Luke Skywalker's own face. So it's very much like your own enemies yourself, and you have to confront. It's only you. As much as we can say all these dark things are going on there, mostly the real person holding us back is ourselves, and it's actually very true. You have to sort of confront yourself, and very often we are our own worst enemy. Difficult to see, always in motion is the future. Control, you must learn control. So there's some gratuitous Grogu photos. And if you don't know who this character is, it's in The Mandalorian. I know some people haven't seen it. People refer to Baby Yoda. It's apparently not related to Yoda, but I just put some pictures in there just to lighten it up a little bit, and it's all kind of cute and stuff. And now time for coffee or maybe something stronger. I don't think maybe I haven't got time for questions. I've got 5 minutes. I don't know if that's not enough time. Maybe it isn't, but either way, I thank you for coming, and what can I say? May the Force all be with you. Thank you.